I think you all know this is the AI update, the quarterly update coming through. It's a bit later than normal, not just because I was cowardly and wanted to escape the initial market crash in April, but also because we had obviously the April period where we have all those holidays in a row, and so this is the first week after which we have a full week in order to discuss markets. So it's a little later than normal, but it's the normal quarterly update. We're just going to talk about what's happening in the world and what's been happening with the AI portfolio. So, as usual, you guys know this is Rand Swiss. What we do is online trading, private broking, managed portfolios, structured products, offshore transfers, wealth management, and tax-free savings accounts. This particular part of seminar is regarding managed portfolios, particularly our AI portfolio. But also, I'm going to talk to you about AI in general, not just what we are doing at the moment, and what the trends are going forward. So, I thought I had blocked this out, so sorry about that. If you are offended by the language. But so this is where we are, okay? We are just around the time in which basically robots can do funny little tricks, and about to hit the time in which robots are going to be doing incredibly scary things, or at least impressive things. And right now, I think this period is much shorter than you think it's going to be. Getting from ant to bird to chimp is a much bigger jump than getting from dumb human to smart human. And I think we are going from the dumb human to smart human thing at the moment. Currently, the best programs out there, the best AI systems, are testing better than 85% of human beings. By probably 2027 to maybe early 2028, it's going to test better than 99.5, 99.9% of human beings. That means 1 in 1,000 people, those 500 people are going to be better than the AI. And then the following year or two are going to most tasks we can do tests on. There'll be no human being that can beat the machine. It's going to be how chess was. There were chess computers that could beat humans in the early 1990s. There were chess computers that could match Garry Kasparov a few years later. And right now, 20 years later, or 25 years later, the world's best player, probably the best player in history, Magnus Carlsen, you could beat him with your phone, okay? And that's kind of what we expect to happen with AI. It progresses while we kind of stay at the same kind of level. So let's look at the agenda for this week, or this seminar. We're starting off with the state of the world. We can discuss what the current state of AI looks like, looking at China, AI, agents, cars and robots, and then at the portfolio. Okay, so let's start off with the state of the world. This here is what's termed the leaderboard. Basically, it's a leaderboard of the best models out there in the world, according to an arena score, okay, done by Hugging Face. Now, let's look at what this actually says. Firstly, you have a company called DeepSeek, down right here at the bottom. And the thing with DeepSeek is that this is a Chinese model, open source model done by a company that, people were saying spent $6 million. Reality is probably, an order of magnitude more than that, maybe a little more than that even, 65 to $100+ million. But it's in the same leaderboard as things like Grok, ChatGPT 4, O3, and Gemini, that probably costs an order of magnitude more than that. We're approaching the $1 billion plus, AI models at the moment. That's number one. That shows that even cheaper models, but with newer technology, are competing, number one. The next thing is that the top models are all the newest models. It's Grok 3 is up there. It's, Gemini 2.5, okay, Gemini 2. It is basically ChatGPT. Oh, and by the way, the O3 versus the 4.0, they have a very weird naming system, but O3 is basically a newer model. You can see there's O3 as of the 16th of April versus 4.0 of the 26th of March. Dylan, sorry. Do you have a question? You can just type that in. There's a Q&A box if you want to type that in the Q&A box. Okay. or you can type it in the chat if you don't have the Q&A box available. Okay. So the thing to note here is twofold. There's two trends happening. Firstly, we are getting the newer models being better than the older models. Now, the way I'd phrase this is like this. Imagine we have a new Samsung phone coming out today. In all likelihood, it's better than the Apple phone from, say, 2 years ago. Is it better than the Apple phone from 6 months ago? Maybe not. Okay. But when it comes to things like, for instance, these models, look at this. Gemini. This is basically from last week, or this couple of days ago. The next best one is basically from March. O3, the best one is basically from April. The next best one is from March. Then we're having Grok from February. You can see the timelines here. The flash ones and the previews and the pros, understand that some of these things are kind of, how can I say, they're restricted, they're cheaper models, they're easy to run, that kind of stuff. But generally what you're finding is that the best model from a particular company is the newest model, okay? And the newest model among different companies generally is the best model, showing that improvement continues to happen with regards to these systems. So the trends are scaling is slowing down, but still works. We are still getting, some really, really good performance coming through from scaling. There are diminishing returns, meaning that you need to maybe more than double inputs to get double the performance. Okay, but as DeepSeek has shown, sometimes a different modality can give you much better performance with much less cost coming in. The newest models are most likely to be the best, okay? And leadership changes regularly. That shows that there's competition, there's progress, and we are getting to a point right now where all these models, basically are achieving more than even the best models from other companies from last year. Multimodal is now the norm. Multimodal means that these things are not just about voice, not just about writing, sorry. They're now including audio, they're now including video. They can talk about pictures. Anyone that's tried even the free Grok that you get if you have a Twitter account, or the free GPT or the free Gemini that you can access, you can see that if you input an image, even something like a medical scan, you'll get a kind of like an explanation of what's happening there. You'll get advice, and sometimes for medical stuff and so on, that's comparable to what you would get by talking to the doctor. Okay. In fact, I advise most of you guys who are going to see a doctor and having scans and tests and so on done, just put it through one of these models, put it through Gemini, put it through ChatGPT, and just ask them questions about your results, and see how far it differs from what your doctor is saying. And if it does differ, just query that with the doctor and see if there's any kind of explanation for that. But multimodal is now the norm, and I don't think we're going to go back. It's like there was a time in which voice wasn't a big deal in cinema, then suddenly voice became the thing, and then every movie right now has voice in it. It's like color used to be a big deal in movies. Now every movie has color in it. The same thing is going to happen here. Multimodality is the new norm. It might take a little more time for everybody to get on board, but expecting next year or two that there'll be no non-multimodal LLMs out there. Next, quantum computing will not be significant for several years, if ever. There's been talk from people like Microsoft about quantum computing, and there were big announcements made earlier this year. The thing to understand about computing is that, especially quantum computing, is, let's just say they solved all the problems of quantum computing tomorrow. It's a solved thing. They know how to build a quantum computer. You'll only have the first computers available, or chips available for use by the general public in over a year's time. You'll have to redesign how the manufacturing process is made. You'd have to have these factories built and tested, et cetera, and then only then will you have the chips being made. So even if it was a case where we've solved all the major issues around quantum computing today, it's a couple of years at least before we see them affecting the AI space. And we have not solved quantum computing. We are not just a little bit away. The best ones out there are like a couple of hundred, qubits, which is what the thing is for quantum bits, basically. And by most measures, that's maybe a couple, orders of magnitude away from where they need to be in order to get, significant improvements over what we have right now in terms of, classical computing, let me say. So even if the best case scenario, like I said, we solve it in the near term, add a couple of years beyond that before we actually have those ships being shipped out. Next, China is behind, but much less than we thought. And that was one of the big news events over the last few months. The Chinese are really, really caught up and are very close behind. There was an assumption that Chinese were maybe, say, 2 or 3 years behind what the Americans were doing. Some were saying as much as 5 years behind. The latest models, as you can see, DeepSeek is on that list. And is testing as well as Gemini and GPT are really close to running the models offered there. And like I said, DeepSeek was created for a fraction of the price of these models. And DeepSeek was created by a company that wasn't even primarily an AI company. It was a hedge fund run by a visionary hedge fund investor, by the way. But it's a very different, picture than we saw like at the end of last year, where we were thinking maybe the US has a lead and can afford to take 6 months off. And people are saying the US could take 6 months off because they were so far ahead of the Chinese without losing their lead. That is not the case anymore. 6 months off for the Chinese, the Chinese will probably take over the US. One of the big things that allowed AI to take off in China is something called distillation. And I'll talk about it in a second here. But distillation is a new technique in which you can take a very expensive model and kind of distill the intelligence out of it and get 90% of performance for 10% of the cost. And that's a kind of thing that the Chinese have really, excelled at. And DeepSeek, does do that, I think, to a large extent. And to get an idea of how we know that to be true, there were times when you could ask DeepSeek what it was, and it would say it was GPT. Okay, or ChatGPT. Why? Because it was trained on ChatGPT's outputs. And therefore, when basically, if you had asked ChatGPT what it was, it will say it was ChatGPT. You ask DeepSeek, which was trained on ChatGPT's outputs, what it was, it says the same thing ChatGPT would have said. Okay? And that distillation process is important for a number of things. Firstly, it significantly reduces the cost of basically expanding access to some of the higher-end models. Like I said, 90% of the performance, 10% of the cost. Number two, it means the moat around some of these models may not be as great as you think. If the Chinese can get access to, the weights for ChatGPT 5 or Gemini 4, whatever it may be, they can get something out of that really quickly. And maybe they don't get access to weights, but just get access to the outputs of these models. Just basically are able to ask it 1,000,000,001 questions. They can still get something that's maybe almost as good as these original models for a fraction of the cost. Next, there's been a significant change happening in the work environment. Coding. For those that have seen, coding jobs have fallen dramatically. If you have a young kid right now, finishing matric this year, and they say what they want to do is get into computer programming, I would be reticent about telling them to do that. The number of jobs available for programmers has fallen sharply. I mean, significantly. We are significantly below where we were even before COVID at the moment. Next thing, customer service. We are starting to see AI take a bigger and bigger chunk out of customer service. At the moment, there's still a space for things like, for instance, sales calls and so on. Or if you're talking about helplines, if you're talking about, help in, with procedures and so on, the AI systems are there. Next, graphical design. We have seen, still pictures. That's pretty much been done. The latest AI models, you really cannot tell the difference between a real picture and a fake picture, except if the subject matter is so ridiculous that people will know that this never happened. But if you just had a picture that of a normal, situation that was not going to arouse suspicion, and I showed you a bunch of AI pictures mixed amongst of real pictures, you probably would not be able to tell the difference. Next, education. We've seen a couple of things come up education that are really interesting. Firstly, teaching. It appears that AI tutors are incredibly effective. Able to shift test scores for students more than one standard deviation. That means you're taking a kid that was maybe 50% and putting him in the top, say, 15%. You know what I mean? So the average student to the top 15% above, it was the 80%, number. That's a huge difference. And AI seems to be able to do that. This individualized teaching that comes from the AI system is really, really powerful, number one. Number two, assessment has become a lot more difficult with AI. We are seeing, universities especially that ask for essays and ask for other kind of, outputs. They are giving us, really harrowing stories about the inability to test, and probably a lot of them have to go back to using, pen and paper. So no more typing out your assignments. You got to write it out. But if you have the ability to just, write out what the AI gave you, that should actually give you just as good a result in terms of your performance. So I don't know what they're going to do down the line. Maybe it's going to back to the days of oral exams. And finally, we are getting AI researchers. The biggest models, the best models out there are now doing research. What do I mean by that? Well, it's been said that the highest end models from GPT, from Gemini, can give you reports on things like, business situations, studies and so on, that are comparable to what you'd pay a high-end, consulting service, tens of thousands of dollars to do. We're also starting to see an impact where coding, especially for these AI systems, is partially being done by AI researchers. That means computer researchers. In a recent interview where Mark Zuckerberg and Satya Nadella were talking, Nadella let out that a significant chunk of the new code being written by Microsoft. And Microsoft, remember, is a software company. What they make is computer code. A significant chunk of the new code from Microsoft is being written by AI. And what that means is that instead of having to pay, computer programmers, you have to pay, smart people to do this. All you need is basically the chip and the electricity, and you get it done. Number one. Number two is that these things are doing it faster. And therefore, if you do have people that are irreplaceable, they're not going to be bottlenecked by people below them that are, not quite as good, and may be able to progress even faster. So yeah, we are seeing significant improvements in terms of AI research, and that's likely to continue going forward. So the big story this last quarter or so has been China. So firstly, DeepSeek, also Quen, and some other things as well from China. When DeepSeek came out with its model, basically what we saw is the market was shocked. Okay, the initial number of $6 million to train this model, like I said, not true. A more comparable number is probably closer to 100 million than 6 million. But 100 million is still cheap compared to what OpenAI and Grok, etc., was spending to make their models, number one. Number two, the model wasn't just stealing stuff from the West. They were innovative, like fundamental things that were better in that model, from an algorithm point of view. Okay, so it wasn't just a case of this model was a copy of what is done in like the US. It was a copy, and I'll show you how they copied, exactly. But they also put things in there that the US model did not have, and made it better. Okay. The other interesting thing about China is that they are really into open source at the moment. Now, there's a common statement or a popular statement among the AI community that you basically are open source until you take the lead, and once you're in the lead, you don't open source anything anymore. So if you're the number 2 or number 3 provider out there, you're not going to get access to people, customers, because there's a number 1, and you've done number 1, number 2 provider out there, and you are not going to be able to get into that space. So if you can't be number 1 at the moment, what do? Just basically make something and don't sell it because you're not going to get any money for it? No, you make it, you get it out into the marketplace, you have people use it, and that usage creates data that you can use to make the next model better. The fact of the matter is right now that the Chinese are behind, rising fast, but they're still behind. And so it kind of makes sense in that scenario to go open source. We saw Meta do that. We saw a couple other companies as well do that. And I think that is just a case of them doing it while they're behind. But should we see, for instance, the Chinese take a significant lead over OpenAI, we are not going to see them open sourcing this stuff anymore. Next, video. The Chinese video apps are not just comparable to what is done elsewhere. In some cases, I've seen like things like Kling and so on, they're better than anything available in the West at the moment. And there's a couple other things that the Chinese are doing right now that may be better than what the West has at the moment. And that's because they have some advantages that, are just impossible for any Western company to compete with. Firstly, distillation. Distillation is basically a new technology that allows you to access stuff, like I said, that other people had built. But also, they don't have to worry about copyright. OpenAI has been sued already for copyright. We've seen some of the music programs being sued for copyright. And the legal copyright laws in the West kind of restricts just how much available information that OpenAI or XAI or Claude, etc., can just go and put into the system to see what happens. They can't just take any book that they want to and just put it in because there's copyright. Then energy. The energy demand for these data centers, even though things like distillation and other efficiency things are quite significant, the energy demands are still quite great. And even more importantly for China is that the Chinese don't have access to the best chips out there. And the one thing that makes these chips the best chips is that they are efficient or more efficient. They use less power, okay, for the same amount of output, okay? So if you're going to be using these less efficient chips, you need to have a lot more energy to make up for that disadvantage. And the Chinese basically right now are building more power production than anyone in the world by a long shot. Next, China has more PhDs, especially in the STEM sector, than any other country in the world. The US has an advantage in which that it accesses a lot of international brain power. They don't produce enough locally, so they import things from India, they import things from like the European Union, they import things from even China. In terms of brain power. But the Chinese, if you just look at it from a single country point of view, have the largest number of researchers of any country in the world. And not just have the largest number of researchers, they've recently shown greater willingness to basically to remove restrictions on these guys so that they're able to move faster. And that means that that advantage is kind of, doubling off. And also, let us be clear, the Chinese are spying on the best, AI, companies out there. Elon Musk, XAI, Sam Altman with ChatGPT, Claude, they all have individuals with Chinese linkages working in those companies. And there's been a history in the past of the Chinese exploiting family in China, exploiting vulnerabilities among overseas Chinese in terms of getting them to do espionage. And so, yeah, I do think that that's also an advantage for the Chinese government. Not to say the Americans don't do it. I just don't think they have as much, like people on the ground that are going to be, keen to or willing to basically transfer stuff from China to the US as the other way around. There is, however, one major disadvantage that the Chinese do have, and that's chips. They do not have access to the best chips, and they can't make the best chips at the moment. They are behind, definitely, probably 2-3 years behind. And I think that is something that down the line might be changing. Now, let's look at Chinese chips in more detail. There's two big companies in the world of these really high-end chips that you think about. There's a company called ASML that's out of the Netherlands, Holland, and there's TSMC, which is out of Taiwan. ASML makes the computer, the machines that are used to make the chips, and TSMC makes the actual chips. if you had asked me what's the one area of human progress, one area of human endeavor that is closest to perfection or furthest down the line to perfection, it's his computer program chip making by companies like ASML and TSMC. These are the most complicated things human beings build. And one of the restrictions around it is, for instance, getting close to things like the size of, or the minimum size allowed for, tools, a pathway for electrons to pass under before, quantum effects become too, large. Or things like, for instance, the size of a light beam, how small it can get in order to, like, etch lines on a chip. And we're approaching those like limitations. But at the moment, they still have an advantage over what's happening in China. Now, in China, you have SMIC, okay, tools, and Huawei, okay, which are, among others as well, which are really powerful producers of technology, computer chips, etc. Still significantly behind NVIDIA and TSMC and so on. But like I said, they are catching up. But the thing that we must understand is that one of the things that the Trump administration has done recently, which is following up from stuff that the Biden administration did as they're about to leave office, is introduce what's called country tiers. What's happening here? So what the Biden administration, before it left office, put in 3 tiers. There's the US and the closest allies. There's countries that are not as close allies, and there's countries that are definitely, almost adversaries. So places like Iran and China, adversaries, they get nothing. Places like, for instance, the US and of course, like, maybe some European countries, Japan, they get access to the best chips and unlimited access. And countries in the middle have restrictions on how many chips they can get and, tools, etc. The middle point is very, very weird. It includes countries that you would think are absolute allies of the US, like Israel, and absolute enemies of the US, like Yemen. They are both on tier 2. Okay? Now, in the short term, these sanctions are really powerful, really helpful to the Chinese, so the US efforts to keep the Chinese system, Chinese producers down. Like I said, big disadvantage China has right now. They don't have access to the best chips. If they were given, carte blanche to buy whatever they want to, NVIDIA sales will skyrocket because the Chinese will buy a hell of a lot more chips than they currently do. But the long term, there's a double-edged sword here, because in the long term, what's happened is this system where you put everyone from Israel to Yemen, India, Brazil, all these countries are in this tier 2, restricted to the amount of chips they can get from, NVIDIA and so on. Well, in that scenario, what's going to happen? Well, if you view AI as being a serious, scientific, endeavor that you need to be a part of, a big technological shift that you have to be a part of, you're going to have to get access to these chips. But if you can't from the US, who do you go to? Who's going to be the second best option out there? It's China. And so you're going to hand the Chinese manufacturer like SMIC and Huawei, basically every country from Israel to India, from Yemen to Brazil. Okay. In addition to markets like China and, to Russia and so on, that are these, obviously forbidden, markets to sell into. If you put all these other countries on this tier 2 level, what are you going to see is that the Chinese are going to have a captive market and they're going to be able to sell into that market. So in terms of raising capital to build more like factories and whatever, there's no need to worry about that because you're going to have access to effectively captive consumers. And you may be able to charge even more for a worse product from places like India and Brazil than the NVIDIA was willing to charge to people in the US, for instance. So yeah, big deal. But I do think that it all depends on how long it takes AI to come about. AI in, say, 2 or 3 years, probably the best thing the Americans could have done. AI in 10 to 15 years, and plus maybe even, I think this would mean that in 15 years' time, the biggest manufacturers of highest end chips will be Chinese. Because the incentives to make local production, incentives for customers to buy from you, just too great. So even without sanctions, I think Chinese production is going to rise sharply, but with sanctions, it's going to be on rocket fuel. Agents. Okay, sorry. Agents. So this agents are different from generative AI. Generative AI asks for a question. You answer for an output like a poem, a video, or essay, or something like that. Agents are not about asking for a question, they're asking for a result. Do something for me. I want more viewers on my TikTok. Okay. Not on my TikTok account. I want to go from here to somewhere else. Do the process, get me there. I want to get to someplace, do the thing for me. Maybe down the line, it's going to be run a business. Maybe even down the line, make me money. These are fundamentally different systems. And I think that there's some confusion as to how difficult some of these things might be to be made. The example I'd give to you is, nature. You can argue many things about intelligence or whatever, but there's no doubt that a mouse has some kind of agency. A mouse has its own ideas about how the world works and operates in it. A mouse is tiny. It's also much less advanced than human beings and so on, which makes me believe that agency is something that can happen at a far lower level of complication than we currently believe it is. It's not something that happens after you achieve like 150 IQ. Because there's many people out there in the world with 100 IQ or even say 70 IQ that definitely have agency. They still want to do stuff. They still have the ability to organize their own lives and so on. And that is what's important here. The agent stuff is coming through, and it's going to be basically something that down the line to be able to do things that are magical almost. Now, one of the key metrics, or the key metric when it comes to this agency or agents, is how long can you run without being supervised? And right now, this particular key measure, every 7 months or so, the amount of time that can be done unsupervised doubles. From a few seconds to a few, tens of seconds. Now it's going to go to a few minutes. And then maybe in a few decades time, or even maybe sooner, depending on what the current situation looks like politically and so on, you could be finding basically that we are seeing a huge uptick in terms of AI systems that are doing things in the real world. Doubling every 7 months is an incredible speed of doubling. You know what I mean? We're talking in a 3-year period, being 8 times more powerful. In basically a 5-year period, we're talking about something being over 100 times more powerful. Okay, this is an incredible rate of innovation coming through here. Next, cars and robots. This is, I think, the one aspect that is closer to reality than many people understand here. There's a company called Waymo. Okay, Waymo is a subsidiary of Alphabet, which is basically Google's parent company. So it's part of Google. Think of it that way. They do driverless taxis. Now they have certain things that make them a bit safer. They have LiDAR, which is think of it as laser radar. They have the ability for human operators to intervene telephonically or via over the airwaves to intervene if something goes wrong. But they're doing 1.3 million rides a month. And this is only rolling out to a few cities at the moment. 1.3 million rides a month. Now, to give you an idea what that means, let's just say in a given day, you do 5 rides, okay? Or you do 10 rides, let's say 10 rides. In a given day, you do 10 rides. So you're taking 10, car trips in a day, which is a lot. Every day, okay? For basically the rest of your life. And let's just say you live 100 years. Okay, they do about under 4,000 trips a year. 100 years, that's 400,000 trips. That's about a third of what Waymo is doing. Okay, could you imagine taking, 10 trips a day, every day for 100 years, and not having any significant accidents? Could you imagine driving 10 trips, 10 in your car a day for 100 years, every single day, and not having any accidents? Unlikely. That leads me to believe that Waymo probably is really, really close to having solved the self-driving problem. What does it mean? Well, somebody said the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. The future is here with Waymo. It's just not evenly distributed. In fact, right now, I think it's only 4 or 5 cities in the US that have it. And like I said, 1.3 million rides in 4 or 5 cities. That's going to expand at a breakneck pace over the next couple of decades, maybe even less than that. You're replacing a lot of people. And why is this important? For a couple of things. If you think about the internet solved the issue of communication. Now we can communicate basically as much as we want to, about anything we want to, in the kind of volumes we want to, for almost nothing. For roughly in South Africa, a few hundred rands. Okay, you can have access to as much data as you want to at a speed that basically can stream, HD video on a large screen TV. Okay. And like I said, for a few hundred rands a month, So to a large extent, when it comes to telecommunications or communications as a need, a human need, it's solved. Okay. You right now can, for virtually nothing, where the cost would not even matter to you, use WhatsApp or use some kind of internet-based calling service, do a FaceTime with somebody in Australia as long as you want to, using your home Wi-Fi, which, like I said, you probably spend, a couple $100 a month on, if you wanted to. That's a solved problem. And now, how has the internet changed the world? Obviously, in a big way. I would argue that transport is an even bigger issue, or even bigger need in communication. Okay. And I think if you have a company like Waymo, basically, or even Tesla with full self-driving coming down the line, having solved the issue of self-driving, it's going to dramatically reduce the cost of transport. And the next thing is that the impact it's going to have on the world is going to be vastly larger as well. Why? Well, the number one job in the world was never, telephone operator. It wasn't going to be, something to do with communication. The number one job in the world is right now driver, not just truck driver, taxi driver, forklift driver, crane driver, bulldozer driver. There's a whole bunch of jobs that require driver. Okay, it's like number one job in the world, delivery driver, etc. If you were able to replace these drivers or these human-driven vehicles with self-driving vehicles, they would be saving money in a number of ways. Firstly, you don't have a human in there, so you can make the vehicle any size you want to. You don't have to have something that is at minimum able to transport a 100 kg human being anywhere. So you can have smaller vehicles, more energy efficient, and not transporting the person, number one. Number two, you don't have to pay these people to drive these vehicles. Therefore, you have no limits in terms of just how, or you have much less limits in terms of economics, in terms of having the lowest, value add transaction being done by delivery. You don't have to have basically a large amount of stuff being delivered. You might have a far smaller amount of stuff being delivered. I mean, you could say, I want to get a 20 rand chocolate bar. And it's quite possible, but the economics of this particular, technology, that could be delivered to your house in 30 minutes, or maybe even less. That is the kind of change we're looking at. Next thing is that transport would change a whole bunch of things around retail, like we talked about, but also around real estate, around how companies operate. And like I said, that technology is already out there. Self-driving is ready for mass rollout. Tesla is the other option when it comes to self-driving. They're talking about full self-driving, where you really don't have to ever intervene. Probably coming in the next few months. This is Elon Musk time, by the way, so that probably means it is going to come along, but it's going to come along probably a bit later than anticipated. But even right now, I think the current towards the model of self-driving vehicles is roughly 99%, towards of the time you don't even need to intervene. That's very close to the end of terms of self-driving vehicles. Like I said, impact of automated transport is going to be huge. Now, here is a caveat. If self-driving becomes a really big thing, a company, we will often mention Tesla, but I suspect that the Chinese manufacturers are really, really capable of competing with the Americans. And in fact, That's going to be a theme I'm going to talk about later in my portfolio, where I'm looking more at China than I was in the past for a number of reasons. But I think that the Chinese are probably better suited for this AI revolution than the West is, just because of the regulations around safety and so on that we see in the West that may not be quite as strictly enforced in China. For instance, the Chinese already have remote-driven flying taxis, where you get into a flying taxi and it is driven by a human operator, but not in the vehicle. The Chinese already have drone delivery, flying drone delivery for like food and so on. The US could do the same technology, but they don't have the regulatory environment to organize it. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at in why China might have that advantage. But also the next thing to think about is that the reason Tesla is such a big company is because of Elon Musk seems to be the only person who is able to manufacture in the West at the moment at any kind of scale. Yes, there's BMW, there's Toyotas and so on that can manufacture, but they're not able to basically keep pace with some of the stuff that's been happening in the tech space, and they are not the ones started from scratch, and therefore we don't know how good they'll be getting self-driving and getting like robotics and so on out to the market if they aren't. They are living off past investment, past expertise, and there's by no means certain that the current companies can refurbish and get to a point where they can basically be involved in the new kind of stuff around, for instance, robots and so on. The example I give here is Boeing. Boeing makes airplanes, they fly kind of, but they totally failed when it came to basically getting into space. Musk's SpaceX, much smaller company, far more significant, and that gives Musk that advantage. But it's only an advantage in the West. It's not an advantage compared to China. There are many examples of Chinese companies, BYD, Chery. You've heard these companies, these car names, new car companies being started in China. Okay, and it doesn't appear that the Chinese have the same inability to do manufacturing as the West does. And so if we do see, this self-driving technology, this robots technology coming to play, the Chinese are going to be a big player here, and they will give Tesla a run for the money. You may even see they probably even have an advantage over Tesla at the moment. Okay, now coming to the portfolio. A couple of things to note in this portfolio over the last little while. Firstly, Palantir has done really, really well. Okay, it's now approaching 14% of our portfolio. This is despite us selling some of it in June, also in December. Tesla has recovered, but it's not a runaway success story as yet. We had it's above where we bought it at, but it's not a huge success story. But we still have it in the portfolio, and we still have to have it in the portfolio just because it's one of the few ways we have to play the robotics self-driving story in a more concentrated manner outside of China. You can buy Alphabet, which gives you access to Waymo, but it's such a small part of Alphabet's true value that you can't just say you're really investing in a self-driving car company. You're investing more in a search engine that happens to have a self-driving car company, as well as other things as part of it. That is different in China. And we are looking definitely at investing more directly in things like Chinese car companies, Chinese pharmaceuticals. The reason that we are more keen on investing in China than we were a little while back is that there has been a change in how the Chinese are viewing tech. In 2019, 2018, the Chinese government basically changed its attitude towards tech, made more restricted. They did things like make Jack Ma disappear because he criticized the government and that kind of stuff. In recent times, the government has changed its mind, possibly been driven by the fact that they are seeing the potential around the new tech stuff around AI, and they know they just can't, just maintain power and cramp on their own local companies. They have to give them freedom. They have to give them more opportunity, and that's the only way they have a chance to compete against the Americans. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing Alibaba rally as it has. Even Tencent did really well. And I think that that is one of the big things, roadblocks to me investing in China, that has kind of gone away. And I think that's why we're looking at much more at China. Not just the fact that the government is being less restrictive, but also the fact that the Chinese have advantages around AI that I think we cannot overlook. Yes, they may not have the best system right now, but they have a lot of potential around energy, around research numbers, around copyright and legal restrictions that could give them a huge advantage, especially in things like pharmaceuticals, which I'm really looking at the moment, because they don't have the FDA to worry about. So they may have the same research capacity as, for instance, a US company like Eli Lilly, but they don't have to go through the multi-year procedures that the FDA, puts them in front of companies. Next, Microsoft. Microsoft is the one exception to this AI expansion rule that we've seen out there. It's been canceling contracts. It's been canceling some of its exposure to AI. Now, look, it doesn't mean that they are not still heavily invested in AI. It's just that they had gone so aggressively and so fast. And maybe things like DeepSeek made them rethink some of their approaches around scaling and so on. Because DeepSeek illustrated that if you're smarter, you don't need as much money in. And maybe that's kind of changing some of their views around it. So they are one of the few companies that are actually lowering the AI spend as opposed to increasing it. And finally, cloud and slash AI. And the trend we've noticed right now over the last couple of months in terms of earnings results is being that when the market is looking at companies, especially in the tech sector, they are paying a lot more attention to cloud AI-related things than they are to other aspects of the business. So, for instance, you have two companies. They both get around what was expected, but in one company, the part that outperformed was the AI company. AI part, the other company, it was some other part of the company outperformed. The company with the AI part outperformed is likely to actually go up significantly. And the other company, which even had overall the same results, but AI underperformed, is probably going to see a share price fall. The market is really valuing AI exposure, AI. Well, cloud is almost a proxy for AI. It's got performance when it comes to that, it goes determining how to move share prices here. And I think that is an incredibly strong indicator that the market still believes quite strongly in this underlying technology. Okay, and that's it for this little update. Look, it's a bit less focused on changes. We haven't done any changes just yet. The last change we did was we sold down a little bit of Palantir. We bought some Micron. Micron hasn't quite worked out for us, but it hasn't been a disaster. Palantir still continues to rally quite strongly. And we haven't done any new changes in the first quarter of this year. But next time I do an update with you guys, there'll probably be significant changes, especially around the Chinese sectors. Like I said, we're definitely looking at Chinese manufacturers. We're definitely also looking at Chinese, pharma companies. We'll determine what exactly to remove from the portfolio at the moment to basically allow this to occur. But I think that's a definite change that we're looking to do over the next 3 months or so. Okay. Any questions so far? Any questions about the portfolio? You can put it in the Q&A or you can add it in the chat. Okay. What's the minimum? The minimum of the portfolio has increased because we are up 40+% since inception. So when we started the portfolio, we basically started with $20,000 minimum. In the last year and say 9 months or so from the time we started it, this portfolio is done 42% plus in US dollars. And so we have to adjust the portfolio size based on that. So now the minimum investment for the portfolio is $25,000. Okay, it's still less actually than the 40%. It's actually about you could say just about half of what we should be doing. It's about 25% increase in terms of the thing. Instead of the 40%, if you had done 40%, it'll go up to 28,000. As a minimum. Right now, we can still put the stuff we need to put into it at $25,000. So that's why we're doing that. Anyone else? Is this offshore? Yes, this is a totally offshore portfolio. Basically, you have to invest entirely. The way we do it is we open an offshore account for you, which use your foreign exchange allowance, and then we send them to the offshore account, and then the offshore account we buy those stocks directly in your name. So it's a personal portfolio in your name. That I think is the safest and best way to invest in any kind of company. It cuts out the middleman, cuts out costs, and gives you more control over your own money. Okay, next one. Was to stop China-friendly African countries buying NVIDIA chips and sending to China. The Americans thought of that. That's why they have almost everybody on the second tier, including Singapore. if we look at the amount of chips Singapore buys, it's like over 10% of the amount of chips NVIDIA makes, include countries like, Singapore. I think it's like Vietnam, some of these East Asian countries, and you're coming to a huge amount of chips being bought by countries that don't seem to have a big AI sector. Why would Singapore buy that many chips? They can't even have. They don't have the power plants that are required to produce the power to run these chips. Think about it that way. We definitely not using them in Singapore. And that's one of the reasons that the US basically has gone and had those strict restrictions in the first place, just because they are seeing this already happen. And there was actually an argument out there that a significant chunk of NVIDIA's business was China, much larger than people had anticipated, just because of the fact that there were so many weird countries buying a lot of chips that did not seem to have the capacity to use them. Now, some people have come back, NVIDIA's come back and said, no, this is deceptive because the way we measure which country buys the chips is where the company is built, etc., blah, blah, blah. But there is almost certain smuggling into China. And DeepSeek, the invention of the DeepSeek program itself, there's no doubt that was done using NVIDIA chips. In fact, they boast on their, or more until recently, were boasting, in the marketing material, that they had the biggest share of AI chips, NVIDIA chips, sorry, in China of any company. DeepSeek was boasting about that. So yeah, the Chinese are definitely getting around it. And the Americans know about it. And that's why they're having these draconian sanctions, because they know that if they just allow any African country to buy whatever they want to, they'll buy it and sell it to China at a premium. Okay. Anyone else? A question here about diagnostics companies. The reason I'm not into diagnostics companies in AI is because I don't think that the barrier to entry is high enough. Like I told you, I've used AI to look at test results. I've looked at, and I think that's something that anyone can do for the cheapest models out there. There doesn't seem to be any advantage, or likely to be any long-standing advantage in any company that develops a health diagnostic, AI system, because it won't be very long before the general AI systems like the ChatGPTs or the Geminis or the Groks are at a point in which they can just effectively do the same diagnostics for you without having to have a separate system. The basic model already does. It's like why I don't want to buy cameras, digital cameras, because your phone already does it. You know what I mean? The phone will already do it for you. It's part of the phone's package. LLMs are going to do diagnostics, medical diagnostics already. That's why I'm not looking at those particular companies as long-term plays, because I think in the short term, yeah, they might have an advantage, but down the line, and I mean down the line, like a year or two's time, you're probably going to see the latest AI systems that are the general systems far outperforming whatever any specialized older system that's not quite as well funded is going to be able to do. Okay. So I think that is it for today. If you have any questions, just put them up now. If not, thanks for joining me. I look forward to speaking to you guys again in a few months' time when you can update the AI portfolio. If not, you can also catch me every week when I do a weekly update, generally focusing on the market as well as on the latest, developments in tech and in AI as well. Thanks. Have a good day and have a good night as well. Cheers, guys.